The first time I was ever suspended from school is my father's fault for two reasons. The first one is because of what I said in the kids' sermon. He told me that to find somebody who doesn't have a friend and to be their friend. So a lot of my friends were people that nobody liked and were picked on all the time. The second, and probably the more better reason, is because of a story he told me. When he was a kid, two boys sat next to him on the bus and were bullying him. And my Uncle Doug saw this and didn't like it, so he reached over the seat and he beat those two guys up. So when I was in 5th grade and my best friend was being bullied by another boy on the seat on the front of me in the bus, I remembered this story about my uncle, and I figured if he could take on two bullies, then surely I could take on one. So I reached over the seat, I spun the kid around, and I punched him as hard as I could in the face. I don't share my story with my kids at all. The principal told me that after he suspended me, that he would have done the same thing. And after that, I ended up getting suspended from school at least once a year for fighting. I couldn't stand bullies. And if I saw someone who was picking on people, I'd try and put a stop to it. Now, I didn't always win these fights. Once when I was 19, I was at a party, and someone had called a friend of mine a racist slur, which did not sit well with me. And me standing up to the three guys who did it apparently didn't sit very well with them. And they beat me to a pulp. I mean, I was literally covered from head to toe in my own blood. And my friends at the time were more concerned about not getting in trouble than my safety. And so they threw me in a shower and into the bed instead of taking me to the hospital. My parents made me go a few days later. I had a concussion, a broken nose, and I was told that if I had been there earlier, I probably would have gotten stitches. I don't regret doing any of that. It was worth it. I would do it again. There's something about being picked on that just drives me nuts even to this day, although I don't go around punching people in the face anymore when they do it. But one of my biggest fears as a father, and especially as a father of two boys, is that they will grow up to be bullies somehow. There was this one kid, though, George Coons. And George was scrawny and lanky. He wasn't funny. He wasn't smart. I couldn't find any quality in George that I liked even, although I'm sure if I'd tried to get to know the guy that I probably would have found something that I liked. And George was picked on constantly because George was weak. He was a weak person. Not just physically, but in about every way you can imagine. And he put up zero resistance when somebody would push him around. And I despised George for that. And one day in school, as I was walking back to my classroom after lunch, I saw George in the hallway trying to tie his shoe. And everybody who walked by pushed him over. Over and over again it happened. George would get up and they'd push him back down. And he'd get up and start tying his shoe, and another person would come along and push him down. And he just stood there and took it. And as I was watching this, something in me snapped, and I experienced probably what was the closest to having pure rage, that he wouldn't do anything for himself, that he wouldn't fight for himself, that he wouldn't say something to these people, that he wouldn't just do anything. I was so angry, and I hated him so much for it that I walked up to him, and I kicked him in the ribs, and I screamed in his face. And then I was immediately whisked away back to the principal's office with George. Mr. Barron, the principal of our school, who was now on a first-name basis with my father, looked at me, and he was so disappointed. And he just looked at me and he said, "George?" He couldn't understand it. And to be honest with you, I couldn't understand it either. And then he asked George what had happened. And George just sat there. And so I told on myself. You know, over the years when I look back at my life, and I look at the trouble that I've been in, and I look at the fights that I've tried to break up or that I've somehow gotten myself involved in, and when I look at who I try to be today and what I believe in now, I feel total shame for what I did to George. And I'm embarrassed that I hated him so much and that I never came to that kid's rescue. If there ever was anybody in my life who needed someone to stand up for them, who really needed me to give them a hand up, it was then. And instead I kicked him in the ribs. What kind of person does that? You know, as a Christian, I believe in the forgiveness of sin, and I believe that forgiveness comes from God through Jesus Christ. But that doesn't excuse what I did. And whatever my intentions are, I've got to remember that that is how I once acted. That one time I kicked a kid in the ribs because he was too weak to stand up for himself. And that action then speaks so much louder than any intention I could ever hope to have. And the fact is, if I just walked by and hadn't even done anything, I might as well have just kicked him because that might have been even worse. Just walking by and doing nothing may have been even worse. At least by kicking him in the ribs, I got him out of the hallway and he finally got a chance to tie his shoe. You know, it's funny, though, because we as Christians can believe all sorts of wonderful things, and yet when it comes to how we live out our daily lives, we can do some truly horrible things. Or even worse, we can believe all sorts of wonderful things and then end up doing absolutely nothing about them. We talk a good game, but a lot of times we don't end up backing it up. And I want you to know this morning that I'm pointing my finger at myself just as much as anybody else. You see, we as Christians have a problem, and I don't know how or where or why this problem began, but somehow we got it into our heads that if we believe the right things or if we have faith in certain things, that somehow is going to be good enough. That's all we need to do. And we say things then like, all you need to do is believe in Jesus and you're saved. And we crouch it then in language like a personal relationship with Jesus. We have our personal faith and we want other people to have their personal faith with Jesus. And then we leave it at that. And where there's nothing wrong with having a personal relationship with God. In fact, it's a good thing. We make a huge mistake if we stop there and think that that's all that matters. Because my salvation isn't just mine. My salvation is bound in yours. And my relationship with Jesus is gauged by the relationship with other people and my relationship with the rest of God's creation. The fact is how I treat other people and how you treat other people. That's basically how we're treating Jesus. That in many ways is our relationship with Jesus. Jesus wants us to care for people, to protect those who are too weak to protect themselves, to feed those who are too poor to feed themselves, and to care for those who are too broken to care for themselves. The great preacher James Forbes put it this way. He said, "No one gets into heaven without a letter of reference from the poor." It isn't enough simply to believe. It isn't enough to think that simply going to church is fulfilling your Christian duty. It isn't even just enough to say you love God. It wasn't enough for Peter. Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Of course I do." And he tells him, then feed my sheep. And again, then Jesus asks him, he says, do you love me? And Peter says, you know that I love you. You know I love you, Jesus. And Jesus says to him, tend my sheep. And then a third time Jesus asks him, and Peter was starting to get his feelings hurt, and he pleads with Jesus. He says, you know everything, Jesus. You know that I love you. And Jesus tells him to feed my sheep. If you love me, Peter, if you truly care for me, if you truly love me, then care for other people. Feed them. Hold them. Love them. Having a relationship with Jesus isn't just between you and him. It's between you and him and everybody else. And so when we walk past people, or we judge them, or we're rude to them, or we kick them out, or we blame them for being too weak, or too poor, or too drug addicted, or too slutty, or too dirty, or too liberal, or too conservative, or too different, or too stupid, or too lazy, we aren't being Christians at all. No matter how many times we walk into rooms that look like this, no matter how many times we profess our love for Jesus or believe that he died and was resurrected for us, if we don't love other people, if we don't care for them, then we aren't being Christian. Because at some point, no matter what we intend, our actions have to speak for us. And that's what Jesus is asking Peter to realize. You love me? Then do something about it. You know, I woke up miserable on my 33rd birthday. Birthdays are kind of a weird and hard time for me anyways. I'm adopted, so it adds this kind of weird dimension to it, like kind of hooray, today's the day nobody wanted me type of feeling into birthday celebrations. But for some reason, 33 was just hard for me. I woke up and I went and I looked in the mirror, and I was fatter than I am now, and I was bald, and I had wrinkles forming in the corner of my eyes. And at the time, I had this beard that was probably 6 inches longer than it really needed to be. And my clothes then, because of this weight gain, had felt all tight and worn out. And I felt just gross. And I felt burnout and worn out and stressed out and tired all over. And it was just a horrible day. And so as the night was getting closer, and I was just miserable, and I was probably getting sweaty because I was even fatter than I am now and just gross, I looked at myself in the mirror in the bathroom one last time, and I said to myself, I am going to give myself 3 more hours to feel like this. And then I'm going to go to bed. And tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to start working to make sure that my 34th birthday is nothing like this, that things will be entirely different. And so far, I've lost some weight since then. My hair hasn't really started to come back at all, which I guess I really wasn't hoping for anyways, but I could guarantee you that my life at least looks totally different now. And I realized something the other day as I was thinking about this, something that I'd completely forgotten about, that I am totally powerless over so much in this world. I'm powerless over everything but myself, and I am actually the only thing I can change. I can't change how people treat each other. I can't make people get along or work together. I can't make everyone like me or agree with me. I can't make people accept those who are different from them or to love people that they find scary. In fact, I can't teach anyone how to love. And I can't convince you then that loving God means that you have to love other people. And I can't stop judgments or hatred. I can't fix poverty or broken systems. I can't even convince people that going to church is a good idea and that it can be the most beautiful and rewarding thing in life if we just invest in it. And I certainly can't go around being Christian for anyone. But let me tell you what I can control. I don't have to wake up feeling horrible about myself. I can choose to do something about it. And I don't have to be the kind of Christian that just tells Jesus that I love him. I can show him. And I can show him by how I choose to live my life from this moment on. I can make a decision. I can make a choice every day to try harder, to push myself to be better, to grow more fully into who God intends me to be. I can try and feed his lambs and tend his sheep. And I don't have to be the kind of guy that kicks the George Coombs of the world in the ribs when they're down anymore either. I can be the kind of man who offers them a hand up to put them back on their feet. And I don't have to feel like I'm better than them when I do it either. Today, I can choose to be a Christian. And tomorrow, when I wake up, I can make the same choice again. I have the power through Christ to be better today, to be stronger today, to be more loving today, to be more Christian today than I was yesterday. And you're given the same choice too. Because I think right now Jesus is looking at us and asking us over and over again, do you love me? And with my whole being, I want to answer yes. I want to answer yes with my head. And I want to answer yes with my heart. I want to answer yes from the very depths of my soul. And I want to answer yes with everything I do. Because really, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say that you have faith, but you don't have works? Can your faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, have your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what in the world is the good of that? And so faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Amen.